Hi, everyone. Good evening.
Afternoon, doctor. How are you?
Fine, thanks, Uncle.
Can't complain.
Hi, Mercy, Musa, and Nancy.
Not too.
Yes, let's wait for our guest lecturer. So let's give him some few minutes. I know he will be joining us soon.
Hallo. Hallo daar.
Hello,
Morning,
hi,
Prof.
Prof. Prof,
Hello.
how are you?
Hallo.
Hi, Prof, how are you?
I'm fine. Usapela.
Yes.
Usapela Jambu.
Jambo sana.
I only remember Pole when I climbed
Oh.
Kilimanjaro. They told me all the way, Pole.
Oh, pole.
Slowly.
Slowly, yes, eh?
Yes.
So you have a good memory.
Well, I can't forget that experience climbing Kilimanjaro, especially in the last bit. It was very tough.
You should visit again, eh?
I'm too old now. My kids, my grandchildren must do it now.
Oh, okay. So here, your people, I think some of them are still joining, but I think they want to see your face, Prof, eh?
How do I do that? Share screen, participants, video, mute. I don't know. Can you see my face? I can't see my face.
No. Just stop the video, eh?
Stop the video.
I think you've stopped the video. The video should
Okay.
be on.
I've stopped the video.
No, it should be on, eh?
Should it be on?
Yes.
Camera, okay. The video is on now. I see Hanko Mare. I don't
Morning,
see...
Prof. How are you?
Fine. Hello, Hanko. How's your life?
Can't complain in yourself, Prof.
Are you still singing?
Yes, I am.
Yes. For those who don't know, Hanko is a very good singer. He sings quite seriously.
Oh, so you know Uncle, eh?
So maybe we must ask him to give us a song.
One of these days he should entertain
Not
us.
today, Prof.
One day. Okay.
Maybe next week, eh?
Okay, let me see.
Yes, but I think Uncle, can you assist Prof, eh? Maybe to...
I don't know how. Stop, mute, choose.
So I think there might be issues on Prof side with the settings or camera access. So Prof, if you see on your left-hand corner where you have your little microphone icon and the camera icon, if you click on the little white upward arrow or downward arrow, what are the options on your side?
I have the camera with the upward arrow.
Yes, if you click on that little upward arrow.
Okay, integrated webcam. Blur my background. Choose.
Okay, if you use integrated webcam, does that maybe work? Because it has to go through your camera of your computer. Is there anything obstructing potentially your camera on your computer screen?
Yeah, let me see. Might be. I don't know. There's a little white thing there.
Are you able to remove it? I think if that might be the
Aha.
Dasai.
Okay,
Dasai.
you see me now. I
Yes,
see
we
myself.
can.
Unfortunately, not very smart, but what can I do? Okay, good. Right. Can I start?
Prof, you will share the PowerPoint, so that you can be able to
yes.
control from your end.
Yes, can you give the PowerPoint?
Pardon?
Can you put it on the screen?
No, I'm saying, can you share it? Can you share it from your end so that you are able to move the slides?
Oh, you know what?
I've allowed you to share.
This one. Let me see. Does this one work?
Go to share screen.
Okay, share screen.
Yes. First of all, you need to
share screen.
Open.
All right, share screen.
Have you opened the PowerPoint presentation?
Yeah.
Yes. Then I think
I've got it here, but
just click there.
Shared yet. Shared screen.
Then just click it once you've opened the PowerPoint.
I've got the 2 PowerPoints here, but I don't know how to.
Just click the one that.
Yeah, I have the first one. Share perhaps. Aha! I've got it. Do you have it?
Perfect. Yes, yes. Now I think that is good,
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah, so maybe you can just have it on the, the PowerPoint, the presentation mode,
Yeah.
Yes.
I'll just run. You see, how do I run? Yeah, I'll just run through it.
Okay.
Okay, I'm trying to find PowerPoint mode. Let's see. Pause. But
there is a pep down there. And maybe you can increase the, the font.
I don't see any PowerPoint mode here.
Prof, if you look at the right-hand side of your screen, you will see where it says, yes, there you go. Yes. There you go. Okay. Now it's on PowerPoint.
Right. And I can then, that's it. Okay. Lekker.
Yes, so I think maybe just to introduce Prof.
Okay, you can introduce me.
Yes.
I have some water.
As you take some water, yes. So
it's very hot. Today it's very hot here in Stellenbosch.
Oh, sorry,
No, it's nice. We had
and thus we are experiencing a lot of rain,
We had a long, cold, wet winter, so it's actually quite nice.
Oh, that is good. So, guys, this is Professor Ruin from University of Stellenbosch. He has been assisting the SIMAI guys, especially teaching this particular topic. And I think this is the 3rd time that I'm engaging Prof. And Professor is a guru in this area. This is what he talks on a daily basis, what he eats and drinks. So I guess that you will have a greater moment interacting with him. So kindly, without wasting much time, let me allow Prof to take you through today's presentation. So Prof, welcome. This is another cohort of SIMAI group. Of course, students from different African countries. We have South Africa, Uganda presented. We have Kenya. Where else? Eswatini, and which other country have I left out?
Yeah. Okay.
Tanzania.
Yeah.
Yes, so I think you can begin, Prof. And
okay.
All the best, guys. Kindly let's be attentive and interact.
Yeah.
So, Prof, I think you can start.
Okay, I will start by first saying it's a pity we can't meet eye to eye. It's so much nicer, and especially with students from all over Africa. How many students do we have in this class, Florence?
We have about 17,
Wow, that's good. So, hello everybody, and I hope you will enjoy the lecture. Unfortunately, I've prepared too many slides, but I'm not going to go through each and every slide. I hope to tell you a story today, but the slides are there for you to use. And please, if there's any thing you want to inquire about, you're very welcome to mail me, email, and I'll do it gladly. And in fact, I would welcome such interaction, because many of these things are fairly new. There's some old stuff, but also new stuff. And we are really pushing this idea of competitiveness and value chain analysis, because I believe that is the future. And if you want to be in a sustainable agribusiness environment, that is what you really have to take note of. All right. So we'll have a short one on value chains. I'm quite sure you have studied it, but I want to run you through some particular angles that plays an important role if you look at competitiveness. So to just give an idea of the concept and the definition, we'll deal with some issues in the value chain economics, and then value chain analysis linked to competitiveness. And as I said, that's really the key for sustained agribusiness. So I hope we will be finished before 5 o'clock, and then somewhere in between we'll take a little bit of a break. So you're welcome to take notes to relate it to the slides, and if you want to clarify anything, please come back to me. Okay, well, why do I say it's so important? If you look at that diagram and you see the drivers of the food system, which includes infrastructure and society and culture, and we know culture is an important driver, especially food culture, energy, and biophysics, and so on. So these things are important in politics, but what's more important is the integrator. And the integrator at the back of that diagram is, of course, the value chain. And that is where all these things are integrated to eventually supply a product to the consumer, something the consumer would be prepared to pay for. That's another diagram just indicating the complexity of what happens in the value chain, and therefore some of the latest notions when we talk about agri-value chains is the concept of a net chain. So it's a network that supports the essential chain. The chains would run in the middle of that diagram, connecting the farmer with the consumer, and dealing globally as well as locally. And many of the activities within the value chain would then be supported through a network of other activities. So it's quite complex. And you can imagine if you deal with different countries and different cultures and different regulations and policies, how complex it really is. And then on the other hand, if you see what's happening in the world, you are just astounded how things actually gets through despite all the constraints. And we'll refer to some of them later on. What's interesting is this idea, and you can spend time on this one, but this is a view of executives, how the agriculture system and industry will look in future. And what you can take from that is a very strong notion that value chains, they still talk about supply chains, will drive the system. What's interesting, if you look at South Africa, because we made a study of South Africa and see how it compared, it's a little bit behind, and I assume the same for the rest of Africa. We are a little bit behind linking into the big global markets. And of course, Africa can in its own right be a big global market, but currently the value is outside Africa, and therefore Africa participates in these value chains into the big global markets. And as you can see, that the expectations are that would really run much faster than the old style commodity spot market type of activity. So the only thing I'm saying is value chains is there for the future. And in the value chain system, what will be very important is moving away from opportunistic bargaining behavior, where you bargain like hell, towards a more trustful long-term relationship. And we will say something more about that. But that would be the cement to have effective, efficient, and competitive value chains. And if you look at some of the statistics. This is exactly what is shown here over the past 20 years. This is a USA economy. And as you can see, how initially really it was just poultry and pork value chains, and how that expanded to virtually include everything. So we cannot get away. And the question is, how do we deal? How do we understand the value chain? And again, I'm going very quickly because this is general knowledge, but I think this one might be very interesting because often people describe a value chain as a supply chain, but it's actually much more. It's a flow. It's three essential flows. The first flow is the information from the consumer, the retail, the consumer little basket there, right through all the processes into the decision-making environment of the technology suppliers and the service suppliers that supplies the producer. The producer supplies the storage, processing, wholesaling, but it supplies it in terms of a signal that comes from the market and the consumer. So the first flow in any efficient value chain is information flow, and with all the big data, you can just imagine the explosion that we will get in terms of differentiating products to serve particular markets and how that will be accommodated right through every activity in the value chain. Extremely important, and in agriculture economics, relatively little work has been done on that. Now, the second flow is, of course, the old supply chain, where you have the product then flows, flow two there, the logistics, where the product then is, as in response to the signal that came from the market, is being produced. Often there's certification and standardization processes, and we know that in terms of ethical issues, value issues, environmental issues, those sustainability issues, those certifications will become stronger and stronger and stronger. So that's the second flow. And then the third flow, which very seldom people seriously look at, is the returns, the financial returns. Who gets what? We'll say something about that, but I can tell you now that if the system is not competitive, there'll be irregularities and there'll be unfairness in who gets what into the system. It's not good for a sustainable value chain to ensure that the various players earn sufficiently to keep them into the system. So that's the third flow. And important in value chain then would be the incentives to ensure that these three flows happens as efficiently as possible. And secondly, how do you govern this all? So that is the concept I want you to have on the value chain. Now, that's some of the things that, right. Then Michael Porter, you will hear much more about Michael Porter, but Michael Porter added to this with, and that is where the network idea also comes from, secondary and support activities that gave focus and efficiency to these various activities within the value chain, and those would then be the infrastructure, the human resource development, technology development, procurement, contracts, etc., etc. So we are sitting with a very interesting, integrated, complex concept when we talk value chains, but it's happening, and it's our job to try to understand and improve. I think one of the improvements that will make a tremendous impact is the blockchain. I'm sure you've picked up something on the blockchain, and you know, I had to correct people. They thought blockchain was only to do with this cryptocurrency or in the banking industry. Blockchain is just a system where information is rapidly transmitted right through the system on a confidentiality basis. So if anything happens in the system at the retailer level that may impact on the need of stock, for example, or flows of, or type of products, that can immediately be transmitted into the system and through the system with the necessary responses. So I do believe that the blockchain will become one of the main efficiency integrators in future value chains. All right, just some of the issues, and I'll run not through all 11 of them, but them that I think is interesting and important. Now, the first issue, but where is the price made in the value chain? Now, again, we have two basic systems there. The one system is the commodity, where essentially the way that the commodity is sold is through auction, spot markets, electronic markets. There's very little contact between players there, and there are just a few standards and certifications that needs to be adhered to. Now, but a commodity is a commodity, and it's almost like maize is maize is maize, and wheat is wheat is wheat, except for some sort of demarcations. It's a generalized product. Now, normally, the price would be established between the consumer and the retailers and the exporters. They will take, and that would be transmitted back into the system, and the farmer, in this case, will be a price taker. And the challenge of the farmer would be to produce the stuff at a cost lower than the price that he or she can manage. And if they cannot do it, there's not much scope for such persons to remain in the value chain. But on the other hand, if it happens and the value chain operates very cost effectively and efficiently, that should be enough to ensure, because it means there is a demand. And if there's the demand, there's ways and means to actually produce. But that is the one aspect of price discovery. On the other hand, if you have a designer product, a product with a branding, which differentiated from other products within the similar group. A few good examples would be wine with their labels, would be meat with some exclusive labels attached to meat. Karoo lamb is one of them. Angus brand steaks, beef steaks is another one, where you sort of differentiate the product from all the other steaks, from all the other mutton, from all the other wines. Champagne is maybe one of the best developed, unique brands. Coffee. Now, on all of those, the brand would depend on a certain uniqueness that is embedded in the product somewhere along the value chain. Oh, I don't know what happened there. Somewhere along the value chain. Sometimes that uniqueness is embedded at what the farmers does. That is very much the case with Karoo lamb. It's the case with coffee, Ethiopian coffee. It would be the case with Black Angus beef. It's very much at the farmer. So the farmer does have a leverage to influence the price. He or she is not only a price taker anymore. They start to become a price maker because of the differentiation that is caused in the product due to certain things happening under the control of the farmer. Similar things can happen at the processor or manufacturers, at the retailers. Similar things can happen at the input side. When there's a very strong sort of demand for green type of agriculture, it's all in the inputs, environmentally friendly agriculture. And I've just done a study in Ethiopia with a PhD student of mine, where they looked at coffee and the relationship between the very environmentally friendly semi-organic production system of coffee there, the farmers that needs to gather that and ensure that through certification, and then the market, the global market that is then served with this authentic Ethiopian coffee, for which there's a premium to be paid. So each of those guys with a differentiated product plays a role in making the price. So the value chain is therefore very sensitive to any value add. And I think that is very important. Second one is, let's talk a little bit about who gets what. Now, if you look at that slide, you will see in the case of lamb chops, that's the South African-based slide from BFAP, our own Food and Agriculture Policy Analysis Bureau. You see that the farmer gets less than 50% of lamb chops that's sold in supermarkets, 28% with pork chops, 31% with the super maize meal. Now, the question is, that is the result of value chain interaction. The question is, but is it fair? Let's go to another one. that's even more interesting, and that is wine. If you look at that diagram, you will see that the retail guys would take 23%. If a bottle is 100 Rand, it'll take 23 Rand out of that bottle of wine for them. The government is actually the second biggest taker, with tax of almost 20%, excise tax. And then you would see packaging, a little bit more in the case of white wine than red wine, and there's some reasons for that, but let's not go into that. There's no time for that. Packaging, then the wine making, only 3%. The wine making is only awarded 3%. Marketing would take 8% or 8 Rand, and the overhead counts for between 16 and 11%. Now, what is left to the farmer? Let's look at the red wine. Now, the farmer would get 12 Rand a bottle, and from that, the grape still needs to be produced. Okay, now that is interesting. For me as an economist, it is interesting. But the question could be, but is it fair? Should the farmer not get more? The reality is this: the farmer would get 12 Rand for a bottle that sells at 100 Rand in a restaurant. The waitress or the matron will get a tip, most likely, of between 10 to 15%. That would be more than what the farmer gets. Now, is it fair? Well, you will see as we go through the lectures, it's fair if each of those players in contributing to that bottle of wine is operating in a competitive environment. If there's somewhere where there's collusion, where somebody monopolize the chain, could be government, it could be the private sector. If there are collusion and people sit behind closed doors and they make plans, then it's not fair. But if it's a competitive process, and I know in some of your countries, surely in South Africa, we have the Competitions Commission that looks at these things very carefully. Because the argument is, if it's fair competition, the outcomes, the results, the division of the surpluses will also be fair. All right, so that's one. I spoke about the sort of system, and where somewhere in the system, if there's not sufficient competition, and if the law and the entrepreneurs and the producers and the manufacturers, if they don't play according to the rules to create competitiveness, of course, the division of the surpluses will not be fair. So in this case, it's go back to the rules of the game. And it's the same with any game, with soccer and rugby and cricket and athletics. So if the rules of the game are adhered to, and if they are good, if they are fair, the outcomes will also be fair. And sometimes we need to remember that. Often people say, yes, that the farmers don't get enough. My question is, why do you say so? Are there indications of uncompetitiveness behavior? And if there are, well, then there should be a legal process that could deal with that issue, like we had in South Africa. In our fertilizer, we had it in our the construction during the World Cup soccer in 2010. And those guys were caught out and they were fined huge fines. So that is how a system should operate. Otherwise, clearly, the strongest guys will take everything. All right. So let's talk a little bit about sustainability. And you can read through this, but I rather want to get to some of the diagrams here. If we talk about sustainability, we talk about three things. We talk about the economic impacts that needs to be sustainable. Profits, jobs, incomes for government, very important, tax revenues, and of course, food supply. So there's a lot of economic impacts. There's social impacts. And part of the social impacts is dealing with worker rights, animal welfare, but also to ensure that there's fair value distribution. It's not really an economic aspect. It is a social impact. And then in terms of the environmental impact, It's things like the water footprint, the carbon footprint, biodiversity, toxicity, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the idea is that the sustainable value chain would adhere to all these rules and regulations to have this center point there where we talk about sustainable food value chain development. All right. So again, this comes from the FAO, and I think it's quite useful to think about sustainability in these terms. And then if we get to the point where we want to measure that, it's important in terms of performance to look at the economic sustainability, the profitability. If you look at social aspects, the inclusivity, the environmental aspects would be green. We can add to social aspects the ethics. Are there any discrimination? Are there any exploitation of labor and so forth? And let me tell you, number one is well established in the world, but number two and number three equally, increasingly is getting requested by companies that import stuff. And I'll come back to that with a dramatic example to show you how South Africa will be confronted with these things in terms of socially and environmentally sustainable practices. Then understanding the performance is to understand the systems, what type of governance and management is there, and then to improve the performance. So what is your vision? How do you upgrade and how do you scale? All right, but that is just sort of a quick idea that sustainability is something that can be achieved, but it would depend very much on what you want to do and what the rules of the games are. Now, agriculture is really under pressure, as you can see, in terms of sustainability. And we have a case study on this one just now. So as background, as you can see, the agriculture, forestry, and other land use causes about 24% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Well, it's not like the majority, but it's very close to the majority and so forth. It is an important thing. If you look at that table, and I invite you to take your time to look at it afterwards for your bedtime reading or something like that, but you can clearly see that the big culprit here, the big problem that we are faced with is not so much plant production activities, but it's animal production activities. It's beef, lamb and mutton. As you can see how big their carbon footprint would be. And what they also give you there is the impact of the value chain. Now, in this case of beef, you would see that land use is an extremely important one. And then farm, between land use and the farming aspect, that is the major cause of the carbon footprint. And then the value chain, if you compare that to other value chains, you can also see it's quite substantial. But I think the other point, the note I want to introduce here is I know that there are a lot of deliberations now in terms of the true measurement of CO2 emissions. And some people argue that animals are not as highly taxed as they are considered to be, because some of those emissions are actually getting back as green, as positive green. There should then also be a minus in terms of what you see there. But be it as it may, it'll still be a major contribution. And in general, what we can say is agriculture will be under pressure to reduce. And I think that is the only important point I want to make here. You can look at the pictures and you will also understand where in the agriculture sector a lot of pressure would be executed from various groups, activist groups, consumer groups, governments, people that are looking at climate change and stuff like that. We can expect that. Even Bill Gates now, he's investing to see to what extent they could reduce the gas emissions from cows. And that's interesting little newspaper cutting there. And I don't have the cutting with me. I should have had it here about the so-called bad cow. But we even here in South Africa, in George, one of our towns, close by towns, they have Nestle is now running an experiment to produce beef outputs and milk of a much, much, much lower carbon footprint. So it's already happening, and we understand why it is happening, but it needs to be expanded much, much further. All right. Why all this is important is we know the Paris Agreement. But the Paris Agreement and more agribusinesses are actually signing up. Recently, 90 top agri-food companies in the world has committed themselves to have a zero target a greenhouse emission index by the year 2050. And these guys are buying our stuff. I told you earlier, our value chains work equally outside than back into our countries, but we export a lot of stuff to the high-income markets. But those high-income markets are essentially served by those agri-food companies. And remember, they have committed themselves now, politically, scientifically, in terms of business models. Now, so let's understand a little bit more about this carbon neutrality. One of the things is very important is to start to measure what they are. And I know the process is still evolving, how to measure it accurately, but you can take it as a fact. At a certain time, those measures will be implemented, and that could have interesting implications. But it's important to understand what will be measured. Now, scope 1 and 2 is internal emissions, that of a farm, that of a factory. But then scope 3 is the value chain too. So if you have a product, you produce milk on a farm, then your footprint will be determined not only about your own practices, but also by the practices in the value chain. And the IMD recently did research on this, and they concluded that value chain emissions can be up from 50 to 90% of a particular product's emission. So with cows, it's very big on the farm, but other things, it's very little on the farm. The carbon footprint is actually extended by transportation or by cold storage and stuff like that. I have an example, which I'll show just now, part of the case on our table grapes. But please take note, we are not, any particular player in the value chain is not alone in this. He or she will be assessed in terms of not only their own activities, but also the activities of the value chain that they use to transmit their products into the market. I think that's quite important. Oh yeah, I've got it here. So this is table grapes. As you can see, the estimate of carbon footprint is for against other fruit is less, which is a good thing. Now, where does this come from? A year ago, we had a table grape seminar, and in the beginning of the seminar, they linked us up with their agents all over the world to tell them what they can expect the market will demand from South African table grape producers. So it's the agent there in the country, Germany, Belgium, Russia, all over. And what was very interesting was that they said two things will become very real in the next 10 years. The one is carbon footprint related to sustainability. And the second one is human rights, and in particular, gender aspects. How is the gender factor handled? Now, I don't have much on gender here, but we have a little bit on carbon footprint, because these are the things that the signs of the future. If you want to compete, you will be dealing with these things. Now, okay, so table grapes, as you can see, the farm, 31% of the emission, or not 31, that's the measurement. The pack house equally, and the cold storage 14. So if you look at this one, you would indeed say that the value chain, only consisting of the pack house and the cold storage, is already more than the emissions from the farm. So for the farmer, it becomes very important to be very instrumental in managing the process with the other guys to get this carbon footprint as low as possible. The same with the pack house. system, and the same with the cold storage. So they depend so much on one another. I think it was quite clever to add the value chain into this argumentation. And this is from the World Economic Forum last year. They warned, they say, sustainable supply chains, it's time to get serious. We are not going to allow you guys to maintain your large carbon footprint. So the writing is really on the wall. And this is the case of South Africa. Now, for those of you, it's a newspaper cutting recently. I will translate, but the reality is, say, if we don't reduce the South African carbon footprint for fruit and agriculture products, we may lose 50% of our exports because we will run into regulations that does not allow us to sell in those markets. So the reality is, reduce the carbon footprint, and you cannot do it alone. You have to have the participation of everybody else in the value chain. Okay, a little bit more on the value chain. We spoke about coordination. This is a diagram where you go from a purely commodity market where you sell and bargain on your own into the value chain where there's actually collaboration and coordination. I'm just quickly running through this. This is another interesting one. Incidentally, we are dealing with the issue of governance and management now. So how do you get around these things? That in its own right is an interesting table. But what it tells you is in the value chain situation where you have managed coordination, the drivers of that management culture is about mutual interest. And the carbon footprint and the gender neutrality will for sure bring that in. It's about long-term relationships, whereby people do certain things, they change to be compliant with what happens elsewhere in the chain, and you don't want to do it on a short-term basis where you jump in and out of the value chain, where you get rid of participants the one moment and develop new participants. It's the transactions cost of doing so is just far too much. So it's about long-term relationship. It's almost like a marriage, this one. It's about shared benefits. Remember what you said about shared benefits. It should be fair. How is it fair? If it's competitive. Open information within the value chain, and blockchain will surely make a huge impact there. It's about stability and about interdependence. And just the other side of the market, you see what we call the old Adam Smith invisible hand is driven by self-interest, short-term relationships, opportunism, limited information sharing, flexibility, and independence. What we are saying here, there's a movement towards the right-hand side of the matrix, and we will find increasingly formal cooperation and vertical integration in order to manage these demands that are imposed on the system. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about resilience in the value chain, and we're almost at the end of this first part of the lecture, and then we can take a quick break. But we've experienced in the past 2-3 years so much stress in our value chain functionalities that we've learned so much about it. And one thing we learn is the weakest link will break. The question is, where is the weakest link? Can we find the weakest link? Right, just a few examples. You guys remember the Suez Canal? I hope I can move this one. No, sorry, I can't move because the picture at behind this one is even nicer. But I mean, that ship, the Evergreen ship, Ever Given. I thought it was the Evergreen. In any case, the Ever Given ship blocked the Suez Canal. It's amazing how narrow that canal really is. And it blocked it, and it caused complete havoc all over the world. So that's the one thing. The other thing is the issue of food safety and the devastating effects it can have on a business if your food is considered not to be safe. We had Tiger Brands, which is one of the biggest food companies in South Africa, had to close down a particular brand, Enterprise Sausages, because there was this listeriosis that was picked up there, and 26 people actually died. And according to indications, the jury is still not out on this one. It's not actually the Tiger Brands cold system that broke down. It was like an informal shop where the sausages got punctured. But the fact is, it was enterprise brand sausages that caused the problem, and you cannot step away. So Tiger Brands, and one of the guys working there on this matter is also doing a PhD with me. So Tiger Brands now is strict in the control that they apply to those guys who buy their products on a wholesale basis and a retail basis. Because they say, if you guys don't look after our products as you should, we are in trouble. We had to close down a brand. So a lot of issues around resilience. There was also some, I don't have it here, but in Kit Kat chocolate, they found some pieces of glass, Nestle. Can you imagine what problem that would cause? That peri peri, you remember, I remember it well. I love peri peri, that there was some sort of toxic element found in peri peri. And again, Robertson Spices had to go huge to convince people that they've retracted all of those peri peri from the products, from the markets, and they've produced a new one. And of course, the big wine scandal, quite a few wine scandals of people that added some fruity liquid to make the wine taste more fruity, or even the big Austrian case where they added some battery acid also to give the wine a certain taste, and they were caught out. It's amazing. But I mean, once you've lost your brand, it's terrible. So very important in a value chain is somehow to absorb these shocks. Another very important shock that needs to be absorbed is what they call the bullwhip, caused by the bullwhip effect. Now, the bullwhip effect, if something happens somewhere in the value chain, and because of uncertainty, that effect just expands. For example, there's suddenly a indication that consumers wants more of a certain product. And now everybody wants to have enough product in the pipeline. So the message goes out. We need more of this product. The consumers are buying it. They want it. But every time the more is getting more and more and more, and eventually you have so much more. And then, and that is where the whip starts to get cracked. The consumers do not expand as expected, or maybe as they wished. And suddenly there are overstocks in the system. Now, how do you get rid of overstocks? You've a lot of cost. You have to drop the price, and this causes absolutely havoc. Now, of course, one of the ways to deal with this would, in fact, be via the blockchain, where such information can much more accurately and very quickly be transmitted through the system. All right. So again, dealing with the issue of resilience, where you look at your factors within the chain, again, collaboration, your external factors where you need to go have dialogue about regulations and so forth, and the internal factors, which goes about the way the business is actually managed. So it's an amazing, interesting field. And one of the cornerstones of a competitive value chain would be resilience, and to counter all fragilities in the value chain. Okay, now just a few things, because we will apply this later on after our break, and that is about how do we analyze value chains. Now, I've made this book available. It's almost like a handbook that Martin Weber and Patrick Lambast, Martin Weber from Austin Associates and Patrick Lambast from the World Bank, produced around 2010, 2011. They based it, the argument was, how do we get people to participate in value chains? We know value chains will be important. We know value chains are happening. How do you get people to participate? How do you make it sustainable? How do we make it efficient? And what they did, they used about 60 African-based case studies where they illustrated how do you go about to get better value chain participation and value chain performance. So it's a lot of case studies, very interesting. But what's more interesting, and you've got it, so please read it. I think it'll help you a lot when you go out and into the operational environment. But what is more important, and I'm not going to spend time there, is the following. He gives some tools of analysis. So firstly, if you want to develop strategy, and the tool one that we will do quite a lot about is how do you choose competitive value chain sectors or value chain. Okay, it's about, let me read it, choosing competitive sectors for value chain development. How do you go about? I mean, if you choose a non-competitive sector or non-competitive industry for value chain development, you may end up with a non-competitive value chain. And I mean, that is not the way to prioritize. But in any case, there's 3 tools around the competitiveness focus, designing strategies, benchmarking to improve your value chain. You benchmark it with some other value chains and case studies about that. Then the second set of tools is to do with developing business, upgrading, deepening the value chain. How do you do replication? When you have a successful model, how do you take it further? The next set of tools deals with supplying the market, capturing value through integration in the process, saving costs, horizontal collaboration. For example, getting small farmers to cooperate, could be a company, could be a cooperative, to enable economies of scale. And then also clustering, maybe a group of activities that use certain facilities to enable a more competitive and efficient value chain. Then some tools around gaining market space. How do you capture greater value? And then, of course, very important, standards and certifications and the application of such standards and certifications in value chains. I remember one of them would be the Nile perch in Uganda. There's some coffee, I think it's Rwanda coffee, where they illustrate these ways to go about and analyze that aspect of the value chain and how to make it more competitive. Then, of course, very important, the external environment, support services, and also the public-private dialogue, government policy to enable a more competitive value chain. And then finally is about monitoring and governing and some methodologies that you could look at that. So please, I think you'll find it absolutely worthwhile, might even be interesting for your projects to gain your academic qualifications and so forth. But we will use some of these. And that's it. So I think we've almost busy for an hour now. So Florence, do you think it's fine if we take a 5-minute break? Everybody agree with me? Let's take a 5-minute break and 3:45. Let's be back again. Thank you. And if you want to ask questions and formulate stuff, you're absolutely welcome to do it, and I will pick them up and maybe respond to them as we continue.
Yes, Prof.
Yes. So we're taking a 5-minute break.
Oh, you've taken 5 minutes break. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
And then we will continue with the next one. Okay, we start at we'll start at 3:45 my time, okay?
All right, okay.
All right. Lekker. Ja. Het valt net vanaf het dek. Ja. Ach, it's all right. Nah. Okay. All right. Can we go? Can we go again? I hear nobody. Somebody indicate whether the system is going again.
Yes, Prof.
Yes,
Okay.
Doctor.
All right. Okay. And I'm waiting for some questions. But now we're going to change. We're going to change gears. I took you a sort of a flight of value chains and how it relates to competitiveness. Now I'm going to take you a next flight is, well, how do we measure competitiveness? We as agriculture economists always pride ourselves that we have empirical rigor. So we can put numbers to our ideas. And why would you like to do that? Firstly, it makes you to think much sharper about what you're saying. And secondly, it assists in the argument if you have the figures, as long as the figures are based on good principles and true measurements. Now, that is what we're going to do, to talk about. So it's really about, where are we? Where I am now? What is happening here? Let me go back to that one. Oh, gee. I say, okay. Coming to grips with agri-value chain competitive analysis. How to do it. So let's quickly just spend some time there. That's really the reality in which we live. Jack Welch, the CEO of General Electric, said, well, if you do not have competitive advantage, don't even compete. So I think that guy doesn't have a competitive advantage. And I think it's a Photoshop picture, because why on earth would he be there with his rudder up in the air? Your rudder needs to be in the water so that you can steer your boat. But in any case, it gives a picture. Another interesting thing is the chairman of Ford Motor Company, William Knudsen, said, well, if you stand still, the competition will swallow you. You must move ahead. And there's many things in which we discussed earlier where value chains needs to move ahead in. And then the previous USA president, Bill Clinton, he got all his economic advisors in a room and he said, now tell me what to do. And they gave him all the stats and all things like that. And he said, listen, I don't understand all those stats. Don't give me the stats. Give me the trends. Are they going up or is it going down? And can you perhaps tell me when it'll change? So the whole idea of trend analysis. Okay, so what about competitive analysis? I'm not going to spend time, but a little bit on the other things, but a little bit about the theory that informs all of these things. And it's the theory of causality. What causes things and why? It's really a theory of change. And only if you understand this theory of causality, you can begin to understand how to improve. And that little quote there, Clayton Christensen said, well, firstly, if you just look at the data, you can find many solutions. But what I want to know is why. What is causing what? And why is it causing that? So the whole cause and effect. If you do this, the most likely effect would be that. And if you do that, the most likely outcome will be this. So this idea of cause and effect. And throughout the lecture, I'll refer to this sort of cause and effect or the theory of causality. Okay, I'm not going to spend much time, but only to tell you that the whole theoretical construct of competitiveness started long ago. Adam Smith, where he said it's about absolute advantages. If your country is the best in something, it'll be competitive there. And then Ricardo came and he said, no, it's not true. Sometimes your country can be second best, but still specialize in that thing if that is the best that is available in the whole wide world. So the whole theory of comparative advantage, which is the basis of specialization. And that theory was then very strongly improved through the Heckscher-Ohlin factor proportions theory, marginality, Pareto optimality arguments, the sort of things, new classical theory that we are well aware of. But then Leontief was a Russian, and after the Second World War, he actually popped this bubble of comparative advantage. Because according to the theory of comparative advantage, explaining competitiveness and explaining specialization, America should have been much more active in capital-intensive and human intelligent activity, and far less in lower-level labor activities because of comparative advantage. And other countries where there was lower human capital would have been far more active in providing labor, lower skilled labor and stuff like that. So it's sort of a specialization theory. But what did Leontief found? Both of those things happened in America. So the theory of comparative advantage did not apply to the way the American economy was developed. And that was then explained by quite a few other guys. You can read through it. But I think the most important one then came with Michael Porter, where he said, well, you know, David Ricardo was partly right, because he said your natural resource endowments, your land, your climate, your labor force, your human capital, all those things are very important. But the missing factor here, and that is what Porter said, is strategy, strategic intent. How do you mobilize these things? How do you create them to be a winner? And then Michael Porter, then what was called the new competitive theory was developed, where the natural resource endowment and factor productivities and stuff like that became less explanatory than the strategy and the strategic direction that you follow. Hence, if I go back to where we ended the previous lecture, the importance to decide which strategically, which are the priority value chains. Those value chains that are already competing the best and are already at a high level of competitiveness. So then after Porter, there came a lot of other adjustments and adaptations, but essentially consistently moving away from the comparative advantage of Ricardo and more towards the diamond model of Porter. Now, why I'm telling you these things is that it's quite interesting that in agriculture economics, where is what I want to do now? Okay, let me say a little bit more about Porter. What Porter and the Porter Diamond then actually said, there are 6 determinants. The first 4 is internally, it's your factor conditions, production factors, Ricardo. But then also it's the market. Where's the demand? A little bit what Adam Smith said. But in addition, it's how good are your supporting industries, your value chain? How good is that operating? And then finally, how smart does you operate in your firm? Those are the internal things. And then what Porter said, yes, but in this you develop, you have to develop your strategy, but also looking at support of government and the policies and to what extent those are conducive and the regulations, all stuff like that. And finally, he said the chance factor is opportunism. So if the currency suddenly drop, it's a very good time to export. And if the currency suddenly increases for various reasons, chance reasons, outside the control of the firm, it's a very good time to import capital, equipment, and machinery. So what Porter said, those 6 components, and that is why it's called the Porter Diamond. As you can see, it's just a figure, but they call it the Porter Diamond, where government and chance then influence your production factors. Where's the diamond? Your relating and supporting industries, your demand conditions, but primary, the firm strategy determines how the firm is operating in this environment. Now, and this also then takes, and this is where I want to come to sort of the ag economic inquiry over the decades. It took away the comparative advantage principle as an important driver or explainer of business to what was called the competitive advantage principle. Not the comparative advantage anymore, but competitive advantage. And competitive advantage say you must use your comparative advantage strategically to be competitive. And that is what Michael Porter brought. He put strategy into the equation. And currently, we still use comparative advantage if we do policy analysis. In comparative advantage, the assumption is that if the market prices are not a true reflection of scarcity, then we rather need to use economic shadow pricing, like in cost-benefit analysis, like the domestic resource cost analysis, and that all will tell us what ought to be in a market that reflects economic scarcity. That competitive advantage, and that is the one that we will continue with, is how do you do business? And there, you don't really care about whether the market price is a true economic price or not, because you are operating according to the signals the market price sends. Government would be interested in an economic signal, but business people would be interested in the signal that would allow them to make profit. So what Porter then, with strategy, he also moved away from this, let's call it economic rationality principle, to a business reality principle. I think that's quite important. Now, the application of this Porter model has been fairly dramatic, and very quickly I'll show you 1 or 2 applications. But again, it's a fascinating area to look at, and it's the World Economic Competitive, the World Competitive Yearbook from the IMD in Switzerland, and also the World Competitive Report from the World Economic Forum. And essentially, they use the Porter theoretical construct to develop their ratings of different countries. I'll just show you a little bit about South Africa. That is the document that is made available on the country profile series from the IMD. And as you can see there, competitiveness ranking, South Africa is in a dropping phase. But then they've added their digital competitiveness, which you see that it was dropping to 20, but that is COVID, and there's a slow sort of recovering very slowly. And then the human talent one is also under a bit pressure, but hopefully it will go up. But in any case, countries can be assessed like that. I allow you to go through it on your own time, but they do these rankings in terms of economic performance. And as you can see, there's quite a few aspects of economic performance where countries are rated. Then on government efficiency, and countries are rated on government efficiencies. Business efficiency, again, the rating, and infrastructure. Now, who does the rating? I'm involved in the rating of the South African position. So they get a sample, a representative sample of players in the industry. And they do these rankings. They rank them. And then it goes to an expert panel that consider this. They relate it to some, what would you call it, hard statistics, GDP and stuff like that. And then they will come up with a joint decision on what that particular year's ranking of a particular country is. So let's see. South Africa, this is where South Africa is compared to other sub-Saharan African countries. And as you can see, the blue one is South Africa, that in some cases, South Africa is more competitive. In other cases, it's a little bit less. And in some cases, it's at the same level. But clearly, there's scope for improvement if we look at the competitiveness of the region. Right. And there's many statistics that I'm not going to spend time. We just don't have it. The Global Competitive Report, it looks at the following aspects: your institutions, your infrastructure, macroeconomic environment, health and primary. Then it looks at the efficiency enhancement aspects, the economics, then at innovation. Then it goes to the factor aspects. You see the factor resource endowment of Ricardo is still shining through here. But then a lot of strategic aspects such as efficiency and innovation. So that is what they do. And they also then rank countries. Again, go through this at your own time. It's interesting. And they do it for a whole number of countries. How much? 141 countries. And I also have, this is the Namibian one that I just happened to deal with recently. And they tell us quite a lot of stories where the weaknesses and where the strengths of each country actually can be found, and what strategic actions should focus on. All right. So what's the value of all this? We haven't reached the application on agriculture yet, but the value of all these things is it gives you a comparative analysis. It will help you to achieve the innovation that is required to keep on running faster than the competitors. At least you know where you are. It could help you to create competitive advantages, to compete, to continue to compete, and it gives you trends. So you can do a comparative analysis. It helps with investment analysis, where investment should flow. The trend we spoke about, it identifies certain strategic areas where focus should be on. And of course, it also brings accountability. So now you can ask, well, our country increased or decreased in competitiveness. Why? Who's responsible? What can we do? Now, what is important, why we should note these things, is that agriculture happens within these macroeconomic environments. So agriculture competitiveness is very much influenced by what happens there. So we cannot really look at agriculture competitiveness without understanding what the other factors are outside and in the broader macroeconomy. All right, so there's some examples here of studies in competitiveness in the agriculture environment. Maybe what I should just refer to, let me see. No, I first want to go back to this one. If you look there, Porter Diamond, European agri-food system. So the first time that we really saw the type of agriculture economic analysis was always about comparative advantage. I participated in a big project in the 90s where we looked at with universities from all over Africa on the eastern part of Africa, right in the middle, Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Malawi, Mozambique, because we wanted to determine the eastern part of Africa, what are the comparative advantages of the agriculture sector. That was the type of agriculture economic analysis. And then the first time that it was really sort of the new competitive theory of Michael Porter was really applied was in 1999, when ISMEA, which is the Italian Policy Analysis Bureau, was requested to apply analysis to see what are the strengths and weaknesses of the countries that applied to join the European Union after the fall of the Soviet Russia and the war, the Berlin Wall, and those things, the big political movements in the 90s. And the question was, which of those old East Bloc countries should be allowed to join European Union? And of course, the argument was, but how competitive are these guys? Would it help them to join us, or should they rather remain on their own for a while with some support measures? So there was big strategic discussions around it. And then ISMEA came and said, well, let's apply the Porter Diamond model and measurement, as you can see, RTA, and I'll explain it in a moment. And that was really the first time that this new competitive theory was applied to agriculture analysis, agribusiness analysis, dealing with competitive advantage and not comparative advantage anymore. So very interesting experience to take a look at that. Then we started in 2012 here where I am, and we applied this. We tried to link up with the IMD, World Economic Forum competitive analysis reports so that it creates the context. And we went into participative planning with government, industries, etc., etc., etc. And since we've developed 15 master's reports, 2 PhDs completed, 3 PhDs in progress. And if you quickly look at that, you can see we've applied it in the flower industry, South Africa agriculture as a whole, agribusiness, export industries, wine industry, apples, the impact of the economic meltdown, stone fruit, Namibian dates, citrus, Cameroon, subtropical fruit, wine industry again, table grapes, the canning fruit industry, Ethiopian coffee, Eswatini sugar, Namibian agribusiness, Ghana cocoa, and South African berries, and also macadamias. So it's a whole range of studies that we apply. The process we follow, and that is now to give you an idea how we go about to do this thing, and then I'll show you a lot of calculations that would explain much of these things or show you that they make sense. Well, firstly, we start with a definition. But what is competitiveness all about? Is competitiveness about exporting, or is competitiveness about stopping imports? And what do you want to compete with? So you've got to get a definition, and those definitions are always very much influenced by the industry that you want to analyze. Then secondly, how do you measure? How do you measure it? Empirically measure competitiveness. But you cannot say that without defining competitiveness. Then, now you've measured it. Now I'm playing the game that Clinton played and said, but why is that like that? Give me the trends and why is it happening? So which factors causes this economic competitive trends? Which factors are causing it? Once you have identified the factors, now let's start analyzing it. Where are the weak points in the value chain? What are we doing wrong? What are we doing right? And out of all of this, you then develop a strategy with certain goals and objectives and programming and how to monitor the system. And again, if you take that book of Weber and Lambast, it fits this process completely. All right. So an example of this was the Namibian date industry. We started defining it. Step 2 was measuring it. Step 3 was then identify and establish the factors of competitiveness. Step 4 was to take all those 120 factors into 6, the Porter model, because the Porter model gives us a strategic perspective to do the analysis with. We do the statistical analysis, and at the end of the day, we reach some findings that can be included in a industry strategy plan. So that is essentially what we do. On the definition, I'm not going to say too much, but only quote 2 important people that influence the definition a lot. The first one is Freebain, and what he said, and I want you to listen carefully. He said it's the ability of an industry, a firm, or a country to attract investment and scarce resources by trading products, by doing business in the global marketplace, and at the same time to be able to reward the resources at least at their opportunity cost. Saying at least, preferably more, because if the opportunity cost is higher than what you can pay them, somebody else will take those scarce resources. And what are those scarce resources? It's management, it's workers, it's technology, anything that's scarce. And then, of course, Porter came in 1998, and he said, even though a country can have good production factors, resource endowments, some people say, even if a country inherited good resources, it does not guarantee its competitiveness. Competitiveness is rather achieved through strategic choices, technology, management. And at Freebain, and that is what we did in the definition that we actually use, it's the strategic ability of an agri-industry to attract investment and other scarce resources by trading products in the global market, striving to earn at least the opportunity cost of the resources engaged. And there you have a fit that could fit most of the agriculture business industries that we investigated. It even includes countries that do not go for exports, but rather to replace imports, because now you are competing. You are competing against imports. So the same thing applies. Okay. So step 1 is defining it. Step 2 is measuring it. And in the measurement, we use this diagram, which then say, on the one hand, we have empirical measures with a lot of formula. And on the other hand, we have subjective measures where we ask opinions. From whom? From industry leaders, from the executives, those guys who may lose their jobs if they are not successful. So the factors we determine from the industry and the industry executives, industry leaders, and the measurement we do with independent data. So let's look a little bit at step 2, the empirical measurement. Again, cause and effect. So the cause and effect is captured in a number of formulas. I'm going to do only 3 of them, but there are more of them, but the 3 that I find most useful. You may know them. The revealed comparative advantage. Not comparative advantage. This is a formula that Balasa developed, and he said, but that would reveal the comparative advantage. What did he do? He said X1 is what we export divided by the export of the country. all of this, you take the lower factor then would be the export of that particular product to the world divided by all world exports. So let's take coffee or wine. That will be the wine exports divided by all the exports in the country from which the wine was exported. And you divide that factor with wine exports, wine trade, exports of wine all over the world, by all countries. So what's the wine trade all over the world? The exports, not the imports, exports. And you divide it by exports from all countries all over the world. So that is a relative measure. And what they said, if that is bigger than 1, the country is competitive in wine. Okay, but what's interesting about Balasa and this RCA, it doesn't include imports. And we said you got to compete against possible imports too. So that then became a next formula, and that's called the relative trade advantage. And Vollrath developed that in the 90s, and it linked very well to the sort of Porter one. So that Vollrath said, let's go to the next formula. He said, no, we agree with Balasa, the RCA, but we have to minus from the RCA the imports. Because if you import more, it means you're less competitive. The more you export, the more competitive you are. So if you minus your imports from your exports and you have a positive number bigger than 0, then it means you are competitive. So if we quickly look at that formula, I may have a nicer formula there of the RTA, so the relative trade advantage, which is the RCA minus the imports or the import statistics. So in this case, again, let's take, what do I have here? The ratio, okay, the example. So first, it's the ratio of global trade value in a particular product from country A versus global trade in that product versus trade value in all products from the country versus global trade in all products. So it's a relative, how does this product, the trade of this product compare to what else happens in the world? And the example of that formula is, it would be South African wine trade versus the total wine trade in the world. So it's a relative statement. The value of our wine trade in South Africa to the wine trade in the world divided by all alternative trade opportunities. That means all else, what is traded in the economy and what is traded in the world. And if you go back to that formula now, you will see the RTA is the RXA. And what is the RXA? That would be XIJ, would be the trade of wine in the country. And the XIK would be the trade of all the products in that country. And you will divide that by the trade of wine in the country divided by wine trade all over the world. And from that, you will then minus the RMA, which is the import situation, which is similar. Okay, you can work it out for yourself. The important point is it gives us a relative indication of how a particular commodity is traded vis-a-vis trade in that particular country, vis-a-vis trade all over the globe in that commodity, vis-a-vis trade all over the globe in all commodities. So the whole opportunity cost idea comes through very strongly here. It's not only about wine trade in South Africa versus wine trade in the world. It's also trade of all other commodities that could bargain investment and could bargain activity and resources. So it fits well into this definition. Okay, then the other one is called the normalized traded, relative comparative advantage. And in that one, which is interesting, they take out the own country specification. And in this case, they say, well, if we want to know what is the competitiveness of a sector in the world, you must compare that sector to other similar sectors in the world. So you take the sort of local component out of this, And in the case of wine, it would say the South African wine exports and imports versus global wine imports and exports. So it doesn't bring it into consideration with the country per se. So your opportunity cost in the NRCA is only related to wine. So the NRTA, and that's important. And there's a whole argument, but the important point is this. Where do I find it? Yeah, the important point is this. If you want to compare competitiveness internally in the country, you want to compare different value chains, which would be the value chain that operates most competitive. You will use the RTA because it does have this country component. If you want to look at value chains, international value chains operating, or the local value chain in comparison with other international value chains, you will not include the local economy into that comparison. You will only use the NRCA. That is for inter-country. So the RTA and the RCA would be used for intra-country competitiveness. It's important to know, where should you focus on? While your NRCA, which is the normative relative comparative advantage formula, is used if you want to compare different countries. Now, often you find that the RTA is used for all. That's wrong. It's wrong because when we use it, we looked at Ethiopian coffee. If we use the RTA to compare Ethiopian coffee with other coffee producers in the world, Brazil, Colombia, Vietnam, Uganda, we found that Ethiopia was the most competitive country in the world. But we know that is not the case. We know Brazil is by far the most competitive. It's the leader. We know Colombia. We know Vietnam. So when we applied the NRCA to compare the countries, that's exactly what we found. And Ethiopia only rated 7th then, with Brazil, Vietnam, and Colombia, the first 3, which is more reality bound. So it's very important, and that you must make a note of that, is you must understand the formula you use, and you must use the right formula. Okay, so we applied the data, which is important. The FAO and the International Trade Center, with their trade maps, provide sufficient data to do these calculations. And what we've applied in this case is ITC data. There are particular reasons. This is the South African matrix, and we calculated the RTA. So we wanted to know how competitive is various agriculture industries in the South African environment. And as you can see, the most of them are sort of marginally competitive, while some of them are not competitive. The red ones, the marginal ones are the yellow ones, and the green ones are the out-and-out competitive ones. So at least we have a good picture of what's happening in South Africa. And as I say, I have students working in Ethiopia and Namibia doing similar things there. That is the typical example of the ITC data sets. And you can see there's a whole range of activities and sectors that can be added or subtracted or worked with. So wide range of possibilities. If you look at South African agriculture over the past 2 decades, that is the competitive performance. It is positive, but marginal. What we're saying here, South Africa is still more successful in exporting than importing. Okay, but we need to go further. This is a much longer term one. I'm not going to spend time. You can read through this. The second interesting end is in South Africa, if we look at agro-processing and we compare them with primary agriculture, you see that the red-brown line is primary agriculture is much more competitive than agro-processing. So it makes a very important point. In South Africa, we are not competitive when we start adding value. It's better to export a lot of our stuff as raw materials. But of course, that is a general statement. If you look at, for example, fruit and canning of fruit processing, and you look at that graph there, you will see that in most cases, the canning of fruit is, and they have over from 2001, you can see it's a higher, and just note the high level of competitiveness. Previously, we spoke about around 1. Here, we speak about a RTA of 50, 40. So you can see the green one is processed peaches, the light green one, the dark green one is pears processed, so canned, and apricot. And if you compare that with the other colors, you will see that fresh pears, fresh apricot, fresh peaches are far less competitive. It's still competitive. So it's in general true that we cannot add value. But in particular, and that is one thing that we must always respect, is if you talk agriculture, you cannot talk in general and in general terms. You can, but it doesn't mean much. You must talk in specific industry, firm-based terms. Again, we go back to the Porter philosophy about competitiveness. I want to show you something about wine, which is firstly interesting. As you can see, from the beginning of the century, our wine RTA fluctuated, but increased. And then round about the economic meltdown in 2009-10, we had we really started dropping, and we are still dropping. So wine competitiveness in South Africa, but also worldwide, is experiencing a drop. People are moving to other activities, and we see it. They move to citrus, and the demand is also moving to other beverages. So the wine industry is faced with quite an interesting challenge here. Even more, again, South African case, we find that wine in bottles are far less competitive. They are competitive. Look at the RTA values between 6 and 4. It is the yellow-brown there. It's still competitive. People can still make money out of wine. Of course they make money. But look at the bulk, where you don't put it in the bottle. You don't give it a label. You export it in bulk for our wine to be bottled there and labeled there and blended there, etc., etc., etc. Now, incidentally, that's not the only case in South Africa. There's many cases like that, where we find that the added value actually happens outside the country. That is just a graph, and it just look in the broad. You will see quite high RTAs for citrus, deciduous fruit, and wine. That's the red, green, light green one. And then for our other fruits, it's sort of marginal. And the blue one there is the euro. So what is also important, but not 100%, is that if the currency reduce, a value of the South African currency, we become more competitive because we export more stuff. But it's not 100% correlation, so be careful only to work with that. It's far more complicated than that. There's our value chains. If you would choose a priority value chain, you would go for the citrus value chain, and you would go for the deciduous fruit value chain. And this is our beef stuff. You can see it's quite marginal, but some improvements in recent years, especially since we had the contracts with China. So this explains so much about a country. This is our poultry. As you can see, live poultry, we are competitive, barely competitive, but because we cannot import live poultry. It's not possible. But now the big problem in South Africa is that the poultry meat and the byproducts are not competitive compared to imported stuff. So now we have tariffs and stuff like that, and those tariffs are causing a problem because it takes food security a little bit into a conflict. We can import cheaper poultry products from Brazil and places like that. Is very important for food security, and we know that poor people buy a lot of chicken products. So this is a big policy issue, but it's clear that South Africa cannot be competitive as it is. It needs to change a lot about our poultry and chicken production. With live chickens is okay. Our grains, and so we can run through a lot of things, and at the end of the day, you can say, well, which are the winners? Stone fruit, deciduous fruit, citrus, nuts, wine. Where do we find decliners? Wine with a question mark, of course. Wood products, very high. Wood pulp, wool, very high. Our decliners, as you can see, we can add wine to that one. We have certain risers, so that is the up-and-coming value chains, and we also have losing value chains. So I think this is strategically actually quite interesting. We did a similar analysis for Namibia, for table grapes and dates. And as you can see, I actually want to do now just that one. As you can see, definitely your grapes at a far higher level in the Namibian economy than dates. So dates are competitive. People are making money, but the big money is made by table grapes. Okay, so now you can go on like that, and I've added a lot of these statistics. You can look at it, you can measure it. I think one important point. But now, why is that the case? Can we explain why? And that is where we go into step 3 and 4. How do we do that? We take intelligent considerations from climate change, policies, innovations, but the most important one, we ask the practitioners, the executives, those guys that make decisions, why is this happening? Why do we find these trends? Which factors is causing that? And then we blend that information with our, let's call it, intelligence that we obtained from research and other sources. So it's a bit of a mixed approach. So we've done the measurement, and this is where Porter now comes in to interpret these opinions of the industry. And again, what is the theory of causality there? What causes it, and what are the effects? What we have now, we have the effects. We have the RTAs. We know what the state. Now we ask them, but what caused this? Because you cannot argue against the effect. That is measured. The data is good. But what caused it? And can we do anything to change? So that is the sort of spirit that we go into this argument. And as you can see, we ask questions about firm strategy, and we've listed them there. Company strategy, structure of the organization, managerial system, the competitiveness between rivals. We ask them about chance factors, natural disasters, scientific breakthroughs, terrorist attacks, wars, pandemics. That's all chance factors. We ask them about production factors, which is old Ricardo, natural resources, human resources, capital resources, infrastructure, scientific knowledge, technological innovation. We ask them, and just on all of this, note the strategic factors that are there that you use to strategize around certain problems. Then the demand factors, the size of the domestic market, sophistication, demanding the customers, the international needs of customers, etc., etc. Then we have related and supporting industries, which is essentially about value chain collaboration, and finally about government policies. So we asked them about that. And then we also did in this example, because we want to do a value chain analysis, develop 2 clusters. The one cluster is about those guys that are in the trade. They respond to the consumers. It's the downstream part of the value chain. And then the other cluster is agribusiness, and those that are supporting the farmer producing the stuff. So those are the 2 value chain clusters that we also did. So we asked their opinions, and they came up with, say, 120 factors. And they had to rate them. The impact of each factor. So you identify a factor. We lead them in the discussion to identify the factor, and then we say, what impact did this factor have? Out of we use 5. 5 is it was very enhancing towards competitiveness. And 1, it was very constraining. And then somewhere in between. 3, or 2.5, in this case, we asked them very constraining. Oh, yes, this one, we asked them 0. So it's very constraining, you rate it 0. And if it's highly enhancing, you rate it 5. So the middle is 2.5. And as long as not too many factors are rated around 2.5, it means it's a factor that's neither here nor there. Yes, we want to move all factors to 5, but it's a sort of an indication of the validity of our questions. This is one where we scored the Namibian date industry. As you can see, a lot of factors and also differences between the groups. Oh, yeah, and that was just to say that 10% of the questions indicated a neutral value. Okay, so what we do then, the reality is you cannot work with 120 factors. It's too much. And how do you relate them? Now, this is where Porter comes in. He said, well, there's the determinants. You rate those factors into the determinants. It makes sense. It's a sensible cluster. So what we did, now the case study here is the stone fruit. So it's peaches and plums, that industry. And what we found there was an industry overall rating. And you can see that the top one, that enhanced industry competitive most, was considered by the industry as their business strategy and structure of the industry and rivalry, strong rivalry. They rated that 3.5 out of 5, which is fairly high. And the one that's most constraining is the ability to make use of opportunity factors to swift change quickly. Why? Because there's a lot of regulatory problems, and then that leads to the government and the support policy that's also missing. So the industry feels that the inability to utilize these unexpected factors is very much related in rigid policies and regulations. The market demand is considered from 2.5, is considered favorable, production factors favorable, and supporting industries is operating well. And then if we take it to the value chain, you'll find different ratings. Now, we've plotted these ratings in the radar diagram. The green one is the agribusiness around farmers, and the yellow one is around trade. Now, two things that's very important there, and especially in value chain analysis, is that although they differ, and the farmers are less optimistic, or the agribusiness side, they feel more constrained. That is why they're in the middle. They feel very, they feel different, but they feel similar about similar things. So which one do they consider the most favorable one? Is business strategy and structure. Both of them. They feel they can manage the value chain well. Which one both of them feel most constrained about is government support and chance factors. So there's a symmetry in the way the industry feels about things. Now, that is extremely important in smooth value chain development. And therefore, we should not be surprised that the RTA of the stone fruit industry is high. It's a very competitive industry. Then you break each of these ones down. I'll just show you one. We go to production factors. And again, you have the green and the yellow, and that's their opinion on whether the factors are constraining or enhancing. And again, differences, yes. The green line is less optimistic, but there's a symmetry in the feeling, which again shows the value chain is operating quite well. Demand factors, you can see the symmetry runs straight through, and consistently the green guys feels less optimistic. Okay, so now what we've done now is we've clustered, we've developed a good perspective of the various determinants, and now we can go into step 5. And in step 5, what we do, we add all of this together and we say, well, these are the things that we can do now to develop a strategic agenda for that industry. What must be done, when and by whom? Which factors do we attend to? Where are the weak points? What is the impact of the analysis? We can simulate that now. Improvement in trade, better RTA. What is the urgency? How relevant are these changes? And what things needs to be done at industry level and at national focus level. And how do we do that? We go into workshops and discussions, and we confront them firstly with the statistics. It's again the theory of change. Is this is what happened, you must explain, and then we give them their explanations and we ask them, but do you agree? Does it make sense? So it's a very interactive type of session. Okay, so finally then, just a few things like the last 10 minutes or so is how do we apply this all in terms of value chain and competitive analysis studies? Well, let's go back to the Weber and Lambast guidelines for analysis. There are 13 different tools. And the question first is, what industry do you want to analyze? And what do you want to analyze about the industry? The second question is, where do you enter your analysis? You can enter it any place. You can decide, okay, what I want to do is to look at standards and certifications. But in order to do good standards and certifications, you have to capture greater value. You have to develop a good business model. You have to focus on the priority value chains. So you can start any point, but you will work through and apply many of these different methods that given to get a comprehensive analysis at the end of the day. In the case of the stone fruit industry, we took this tool number 2, and we said, well, let's take an industry view, and we decided to go to each of the determinants of Porter, and in production factors, the big constraint there was the high technology cost, and 2 strategies were formulated to combat that. If you look at the market, the big issue there was inconsistency in quality and the availability of stone fruit. And there's a lot of, in this case, 1, 2, 3 strategies that they put on the table to combat that problem. For example, improve market intelligence, to know exactly what the signals, the first flow in the value chain is the flow from the market into the system. Then the issue of adverse weather conditions, and your ship is on its way to a harbor in Rotterdam or France or Norway or so, to disembark the fruit. It's got to get to the supermarkets quite quickly, and suddenly that's what they found, adverse weather conditions. Today we can add wars to that. We had huge losses because our ships couldn't dock and have their cargo offloaded during the Ukraine-Russian war. So, and in that case, then some of the supplies had to be redirected. So how do you develop a redirectory mechanism while the ship is still on its way, where it can still be redirected? So that's what they did. Then related and supporting industries, the electricity issue was identified. And then government, they said, well, we got to have a dealing with government on the political level, and let's develop a stone fruit industry plan, and let's improve business intelligence, and let's share it with the government so that they understand our problems. And our citrus industry now has a particular problem with exports into the European Union, and the idea is that there will be very close collaboration with the government on that. So that's the one. Secondly, how do you determine where you should focus on? Your focus priority value chains. Now, I think it's pretty clear here. We've had it before in terms of the best RTAs, internal competitiveness. It's citrus and deciduous fruit, while fruit and nuts is something that can be attended to, while the others, think very carefully before you spend too much money on the upgrading of those sectors. All right. The other one is, where do you add value? Do I have it here? Yeah, I showed you the wine one. Not bottles, but bulk. So we did the study of Ethiopian coffee. And what did we find? Again, 21. We find that the dark blue one is green coffee beans. Look at the RTA, 300. It's highly competitive. The brown one is the industry as a whole. It doesn't mean anything. You have to break it down. Now, that's in terms of value add and different value chain activities. All the others, the only one that at a certain stage showed a little bit of a, not bad, still 100, was decaffeinated coffee. But that fell back again. Roasted coffee, it doesn't even feature. Coffee husks and skins, at the stage, it was very good. And I can't remember why that was the case, but there was a particular demand for coffee husks and skins as substitutes, and they made a killing there selling them, but it wasn't sustained. So if you deal now with the Ethiopian coffee strategy, what would you do? Everybody wants to add value and have Ethiopian coffee produced in Ethiopia, exported as Ethiopian drinkable coffee, but it cannot compete. So the suggestion was, let's rather get the value chain that deals with green coffee as efficient and competitive as possible. And with some of the proceeds that you achieve, invest in a local industry to see to what extent you can maybe develop a niche. In the case of coffee husks and skins, it looked as if it was a bit of a niche market, but then it fell back again. But see to what extent you can add some value with local Ethiopian coffee production. But the overall strategy is quite clear. It's the same here. It's quite clear. We must make the export value chain for bulk wine as efficient as possible. Very important. Okay. Now, we did an analysis on the wine value chain, and the funny thing we thought, we found, was exactly confirming what we said. Our raw materials were incompetitive. It cost too much. There's nothing wrong with our wine that's in a bottle, but it costs too much. I was in the wine industry at that stage, and we collaborated with the Nampak and Consul, the bottle making companies, and they told us a very interesting thing. They said, guys, if you want to use only 2, maybe 3 type of bottles in the industry, we have economies of scale, we can make it much cheaper. But the industry decided they don't want to do it. They said, if we create a very special wine, we want to use it in a very special bottle. Now, let me tell you, the people in the industry that said so actually are premium wine producers. They get fantastic prices. They make good money. But they didn't want to change this idea of a bottle for a particular wine. So the industry as a whole decided we won't go that. We rather, and you see how long ago. I was in the industry early there in the early 2000s. And you can see that from 2002, it was quite clear that the guys were not so much interested in bottling. The premium wine producers, of course, and they could afford it. But the other guys went bulk. All right. So if I could end this lecture then, almost on time, it's very important not to talk about agriculture in general. It's very important to talk about industry interest group. And if you talk about industry interest group, you must incorporate all the relevant value chain players. So it becomes a very particular family that you're working with. And it's very important within this family to define competitiveness, what you want to achieve, and to measure the achievement. And I think through these set of systems, your qualitative and quantitative measurements, I think it's possible to do it. And then you consider your strategic investments in the value chain. I'm not talking about industry. I'm not talking about a particular player in the value chain. I'm talking about consideration in the value chain where the weak points are. So if the weak points are in the bottling industry, what are you going to do? Are you going to cut it out? You want to reduce the number of bottles? That is an industry decision. But I think it's a decision that the industry took as an industry 15 years ago, and now you clearly see the outcome of that in the South African wine industry. You must consider, you know, one of these things I told you, yes, maybe this value chain on fruit and nuts is something that could be considered as a startup. It's not there yet, but where's the startup? Strategic investments and innovation in the chain through startup support. So you make some strategic investments to assist those guys to really reach the markets and develop a new, highly competitive value chain. So again, understand your RTAs, understand your NRCAs, how your chains compete in the world, how your chains compete against other competitors in the local economy, and base your decisions and your recommendations and your lobbying to the government on those, let's call it competitiveness-orientated intelligence. Not other it's about competitiveness, because if you're not compete, remember, the opponents will eat you alive. You'll just lose. You'll just lose out. And we know that is the truth. Okay, then number 5. We didn't speak much about it, but we did, and I did show you a few slides on the importance of collaboration and cooperation and the issue of relationships and trust and how important that is. Absolutely. Avoid opportunistic behavior. It's not part of an efficient value chain to be guys that are opportunistic. You must think in terms of the chain and how to improve the chain efficiency. You must understand the trends. We spoke about that. And also very important to introduce penalties and rewards to stop those with uncompetitive behavior. I mean, we spoke about that, the Competition Commission, and to encourage those that operate competitive behavior through, in our case, value chain collaboration, joint agreements, and horizontal interactions and stuff like that. So if you think of value chains and competitiveness, this would create a broad, let's call it strategic framework. And then all the rest that we did today would enable you to give content to such a strategic framework. Okay, Professor Florence, I think I've completed my story. Any question, guys? No questions? You can chat with me. You can talk to me.
No questions from my side, Prof. I just want to say thank you for a very enlightening presentation. I must say I learned quite a lot today. Thank you so much.
Hey, I appreciate your words and I believe you. No, I enjoy this topic so much. I just wish we can get together and have a seminar where all of you can come with a little case study, because that is when you really learn a lot about the bolts and the nuts of this issue of competitive value chains. Yeah, there's a chat. I hope I can get there. How do I get the chat? Thank you. Same from my side. Thanks, guys. Good luck. Good luck with your exam. And if there's anything that you want to talk to me about, please do it via email. Don't hesitate.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doctor. We appreciate.
Hello?
I said thank you so much. We appreciate.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Prof.
All go well.
Thank you. Prof, you are finished. You are done.
All right. Yeah. Thank you. I also say thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Prof. I hope the students have really enjoyed the presentation and they have gathered a lot concerning the topic.
Yeah, I hope
but just in case, maybe, Prof, they have queries, maybe you can share with them your email address.
I think it's on. It must be on the slides.
Yes, Doctor. It's on the first. It's on the first slide that Prof presented.
I will
it's
do
right
it
at
here
the
in
front.
any case.
Yes, so I think you are free to consult Prof in case
There you
of
are.
any queries or concerns, eh?
There you are.
Yes.
All right, everyone. Have a good day. I'll see you.
Thanks, Prof. Thanks a
Yeah.
lot, and have a good evening.
Same to you.
Yes,
Okay.
we will connect later.
Yeah, we will connect later on. Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. And I will leave. Okay, Florence, thanks a lot. I appreciate you asking me. And if you want me to do it again, I'll do it.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Thanks
All
a
right.
lot. Eh?
And I would also appreciate some critique from your side where I can actually improve and maybe cut shorter.
Of course, in case of anything, we will communicate. Eh?
Please do so. Okay. Florence,
All right.
nice to talk to you again. Bye-bye.
Okay, pleasure. Thanks.
Leave the meeting.
Mhm.